Jess, and I'm the founder of Sallie Tomato. I'm excited to be at Missouri Star Quilt Company today to bring you another episode of bag sewing. So today we're going to be making a beginner-friendly crossbody bag. If you're just joining the series, welcome, and this project is going to be a great place for you to start. And if you've been following along, thanks again for joining, and you're going to learn some new tips and techniques today. So today's pattern is the Ginger bag, and it is a crossbody bag with a magnetic snap flap closure. There's a front zipper pocket and crossbody strap, and inside we will be adding an interior pocket, and I'll show you how to do darts to add some depth to the bottom of the bag. And there are a few different options for the contrast fabric, so you can make this bag completely out of cotton fabrics, or I encourage you to try using cork or faux leather for the contrast fabrics. So the instructions for the pattern include for both fabric options, but I am going to be demonstrating using faux leather today. So to begin, we are going to fuse some interfacing to some of your pieces. So you'll need to fuse interfacing to the wrong side of both of your flap pieces, and I recommend a lightweight woven interfacing, so just follow the manufacturer's instructions to fuse it to the wrong side. So you'll cut out the pieces according to the pattern and align all the edges and fuse it in place. So here are the flap pieces. You'll also fuse interfacing to the top panels. So there are two top panels and then your strap connectors piece. So I've already went ahead and done that. And I always like to mark the wrong side, and it's helpful to also mark the piece name or the label on each piece too if you'd like to help pick the pieces and identify them as well. So that's another tip for beginners, to just mark on the wrong side the name of each piece. So once you have the interfacing fused, the next step is to fuse the fleece. So I'm going to grab my contrast bottom pieces, and you'll want to fuse fleece to the wrong side of only one of your flap pieces, both of your top panels, and then also both of your contrast bottom panels. So for the faux leather, you'll want to just use a medium setting, and it's okay to just quickly press. If you're using cork fabric, you can also use a medium setting and a little bit of steam to help activate that glue and fuse it. If you're nervous about using the iron, you can always just baste around the outer edges to hold the fleece to your fabric. So you never want to iron from the right side of the faux leather, so you always want to iron from the wrong side. So once you have the fleece fused to your pieces, you can set aside the top panels and the bottom panels for now. And we're going to install 1/2 of the magnetic snap on your flap piece with the fleece. So grab that piece. And in this series, we've installed magnetic snaps before, but I'm going to show you again because this will be the first time that we're installing it on a bag with a flap. So 1/2 of the snap will go on the flap, and then 1/2 will go onto the front panel of the bag. So looking at the snap, there are two halves. 1/2 has the little button on it, and the other one is indented. So you'll want to grab the one with the little button on it, and then one of your washers. And I've already went ahead and marked the placement for the magnetic snap according to the pattern, so it'll just be centered up from the bottom edge. And take one of your washers, and you're going to center the hole of the washer over the placement mark, and then just mark the slits of the washer. So one of my #1 tips when installing magnetic snaps is to use a pin to put at the top edge of the slits, and grab a seam ripper, and you'll poke your seam ripper through your fabric at the bottom of the slit, and then you'll cut up to the pin, and you'll notice your seam ripper will stop at the pin. So you wouldn't want to cut too far past that into the rest of your fabric. So that's super helpful and just a quick thing to do for magnetic snaps. So cut both of those slits and remove the pin. And then take your snap and poke the prongs through from the right side to the wrong side. You'll flip your project over and place the washer over the prongs, and then bend the prongs away from the center. So that just helps distribute some of that bulk of the metal. And then you can add some permanent glue to the wrong side to further reinforce the snap. And then if you have any leftover scraps of interfacing, you can fuse a piece over the wrong side to protect your fabric. So that's it for installing the magnetic snap on the flap. So now we're going to finish preparing the flap. So you're going to grab the other piece that does not have any fleece on it, and you're going to place the two flap pieces right sides together and align all the edges. Take some sewing clips or pins, and we're going to clip the two pieces together. So sewing clips are very helpful for bag making since we're using a lot of different interfacings and there's a lot of more thickness to clip through, so they hold them together nicely. Then we're going to sew around the sides and the bottom edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Do not sew across that top straight edge. So, and as you reach the curved edge, you can just stop and then lift up your presser foot and turn to adjust, just to make sure that that raw edge of your fabric is in line with the 1/4 inch mark on the needle plate or whatever reference you're using on your machine. So now we're going to get rid of some of the bulk along the curves for a smoother finish and easier turning. So you can just take your scissors and trim so the seam allowance is about 1/8 of an inch wide along the curved edges at the corners, and we're going to leave the rest of the seam allowance. So then you can turn the flap right side out. And I love using the Sallie Tomato Essential Turning and Creasing Tool, so you can smooth out the corners using the rounded end. This end I like using as a stiletto, so it's just super handy to have at your sewing machine for all kinds of bag making. So I'm going to just bring it inside against the wrong side and run it along the seam to help smooth out those corners. So then we can give it a little bit of a press over at the iron. And you can use your fingers to roll the seam to make sure that it has that shape. And the seam is all the way to the edge. Now we're going to top stitch. So at the machine, we're going to sew with an 1/8 inch seam allowance around the sides and the bottom edge. And for top stitching, I usually like to increase the stitch length to 3 millimeters. Just looks a little bit more professional. So here I can feel the hardware on the other side, so just be conscious of that, but it will be away from your needle because of how it's positioned. So here's what your flap should look like after preparing that. And the next step will be to install the magnetic snap on the front top panel. So grab that. So I've already went ahead and marked the placement for the magnetic snap on this piece. And we're going to do the exact same steps to install the other half of the snap. So after installing the magnetic snap, you can set this piece aside. If you're using cotton fabric for your contrast bottom panels, follow along with the pattern. There's one extra step that you'll need to do to finish off that raw edge where the zipper will be placed. But we're going to jump ahead and start installing the zipper pocket on the bottom panels. So for the zipper pocket, you'll need your front bottom panel, a zipper, and I'm using nylon coil zippers by Sallie Tomato. These have a metallic finish, so they look like metal, but they're actually nylon, so you can cut and sew over them, and they look great with your hardware. They're a lot of fun to use, so I recommend trying out those for this project. And then you'll also need both of your lining pieces for your zipper pocket. So one is a little bit shorter than the other, and that's intentional, and I'll show you why in a minute. So you're going to start by pressing the long bottom edge a ½ inch to the wrong side. And then you'll repeat for the other side, so you can use a seam gauge or a hot ruler to help you with this step. And I'm using a lighter lining fabric, so good thing I noted the wrong side, because the front and the back are very similar, so you may want to do that as well if you're using a lighter lining fabric. So you're going to start with the shorter piece, so you can set the longer lining piece aside for the moment, and you want to position it with that folded edge at the bottom and the right side of your fabric face up. So you're going to take your zipper and align the long edge of the zipper along the top long edge of the shorter lining piece. And I'm going to add a couple of clips to hold the layers together. So your pull should be closing towards the right if you're right-handed, and if you're left-handed, you'll want to flip the zipper around and have it close to the left. So now is the time to adjust that if you'd like. And we're going to sew along the zipper with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to move the zipper pull out of the way. This is where a zipper foot comes in handy, or if you have a narrow foot on your machine. So now we're going to press the zipper away from the lining fabric. So the zipper tape should be flat and the wrong side of the fabric will be face up. So I'm just going to press this real quick over at the iron. And it's okay if you iron over the nylon coil. So then you'll take your bottom panel and center it over the zipper tape. So you'll just want to make sure that equal sides of the tape are on either side of this indented section. And we can add some basting tape to hold this together. You can apply a piece along that lower portion of the zipper tape and then just stick it down. Another option is to use some washi tape, and you can sew directly through this paper tape and then tear it off after you're done sewing. So I'm just going to use a couple pieces of this. And usually I like to clip the upper edges as well, so that way they stay even. So you'll want to make sure that your zipper tape is even with that top edge as well. And we're going to sew the zipper in place 1/8 inch from the indented section. And normally when you're sewing on cork fabric or faux leather, you can get by with just your standard foot, which is your metal foot. But if you are finding that your fabric is sticking to your foot, you could always switch over to a Teflon foot. So now you can just tear off the tape if you decided to use the paper tape. Then you're going to take your other zipper lining piece, so the longer piece, and you're going to position the fabric with the right side face up and that folded edge at the bottom, and center the bottom panel over the lining piece. And then you'll want to flip the project over so the wrong side is face up, and that way you can just double check everything is aligned. So align the top edges, the side edges, that bottom folded edge should stay folded, so just make sure everything is lined up where it should be. I'm going to add a couple clips to the top, and now we can flip it back over to the right side, and we're going to sew along the top edge of the zipper, starting and stopping at our top stitching that we just did, and this will be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Next, we're going to sew the side seam. So fold the bottom front panel away from the right side of the zipper pocket, and you can add a couple pins or clips to make sure the side edges stay even. And we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you'll repeat the same for the left side. So this time it's a little bit easier to sew starting at those bottom folded edges up to the top. So that way the bulk of the project is to the left. And that's it for the zipper pocket. So make sure that you do not sew across the bottom. This will be for when we turn the bag right side out later. And you can set this piece aside, and we're gonna work on making the slip pocket for the lining. So first you're going to press the top straight edge of both of your slip pocket pieces a 1/4 inch to the wrong side. And then you're going to place your pieces right sides together and align all edges. So you can add some pins or clips to hold the layers together. And then you're going to sew along the sides and the bottom edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So similar to the flap, we're just going to trim off about an 1/8 inch around the curved edges, and then turn the pocket right side out. Smooth out the corners. And make sure that those edges along the top stay pressed to the wrong side, and we're just going to press the pocket flat. Now you're going to top stitch an 1/8 inch along the top edge, and that'll seal up that top edge where we turned it right side out. Just going to clean up some of these thread tails and just trim them close to the fabric. Then take one of your lining pieces, and we're going to center the pocket on the lining according to the pattern. So just reference the pattern for the exact placement. And then take some pins and pin the pocket in place. And now we're going to top stitch the pocket in place an 1/8 inch from the sides along the bottom curve and back up the other side, and make sure to back stitch for reinforcement. I'm going to give it another press just to get out any creases. And next we're going to create the darts. So grab your other lining panel and both of your bottom panels out of your contrast fabric. I'm going to set the lining panels aside and the front panel, and we're going to start with the back bottom panel. So to create the darts, you'll notice that there's triangles cut out of the edges on the bottom edges. So you're simply going to fold your project and align those raw edges of the dart so you have your right sides together. I'm going to add a clip to hold it in place. And you'll want to start at that bottom edge of your fabric and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance until you reach the folded edge. And make sure to backstitch. So this is a really simple, quick way to add some depth and shape to our bag. So here's what the dart will look like stitched. And then when you press it open, you'll notice that it has some more depth to it, even just laying flat on the table. So now we'll repeat for the remaining darts on all the pieces. And on the front piece, just make sure that your zipper pocket lining stays out of the way. And then we'll repeat for the lining panels. So here's all of our pieces with the darts ready to go. And next we're going to prepare the strap connectors. So take your strap connectors piece, so it's just this small rectangle, and you're going to press both of the long edges to the center. So if it's easier for you to mark the center first, you can certainly do that with your ruler. I'm just going to fold both edges in so it looks like they're in the center, and then press. And then you'll fold the piece in half again with wrong sides together, and that will encase those raw edges. And now we're going to top stitch along each of those long edges with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to take the connector and fold it in half to match those raw short edges. And at that folded edge, take your scissors and just cut the piece into 2. So now you have one connector for each of your D-rings. And you're going to slide one connector through the center of the D-ring and fold it in half. So that way the flat side of the hardware is against the folded edge. And then you're going to position the connector on your fabric according to the pattern. So there will be a little bit of fabric extended of the strap connector past the edge of your fabric of your top panel. And then you repeat for the other connector. So just add a clip to hold it in place, and we're going to sew it in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And since the side is angled, you'll want to make sure that the top edge of the connector is even with the top edge of the top panel. So just double check that before you sew. And make sure to backstitch for reinforcement. So here's what your connectors will look like attached to your top panel. And next we're ready to assemble the exterior of the bag. So start with your front top panel with the magnetic snap and the connectors, and then also your bottom front panel with the zipper pocket. And you're going to align the long straight edges and place your pieces right sides together. And add some sewing clips to hold the layers together. Now you're going to sew across the top with 3/8 inch seam allowance. So as you reach the zipper, if you're not using a zipper foot like me, then you'll need to raise the presser foot and slide the zipper out of the way. And then you can just lower it back down and continue sewing. So now you're going to fold that top panel away from the bottom. And since we're using faux leather, I'm not going to press this with the iron. So I'm going to grab my seam roller and just roll the fabric along the seam to give it a crease. And then we're going to top stitch the top panel 1/8 inch from the seam. So the seam allowance should be pressed up. So just as you sew, make sure that it stays up towards the top panel. So our front is ready to go and prepared, and then we'll repeat the same steps to attach the back top panel to the back bottom panel. So just place your pieces right sides together, aligning that long straight edge. Add some sewing clips. And then sew with 3/8 inch seam allowance. And press away that top panel again. And use your seam roller to flatten the seam. And then top stitch. And one last step to finish off the back panel is to attach the flap. So you're going to center the flap with a magnetic snap side face up, and you'll want that raw straight edge 1 inch down from the top edge of the bag, and use some pins to hold it in place. And then you'll sew across the flap with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's very important to back stitch. And then fold the flap up, and we can press this at the iron. Just be careful that you don't touch your iron to the faux leather. And now we're going to top stitch 1/8 inch from that seam, and then also 3/8 inch. So since we used a 1/4 inch seam allowance, when we do that second line of 3/8 inch, it's a little bit wider and it'll conceal that raw edge. You can trim up any of those thread tails. So now unzip the zipper, and this is very important because we're going to turn the bag right side out through this zipper pocket in the end. And now you're going to place your pieces right sides together and start by aligning the top edges and the sides and add a couple clips. And you'll want to make sure that those seams from connecting the top and the bottom panels are even as well, so match those up. And then next match up the darts, and you'll want to nest the seams, which means you'll just finger press one seam in one direction and the other seam in the other direction. So after you have those matched up, then you can add some extra clips to make sure that the edges stay aligned. Now we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the sides around the bottom and up to the other top edge. Do not sew across the top edge. So you can leave your exterior with the wrong side face out, and now we're going to assemble the lining. So position your lining pieces right sides together and align the top edges and the sides. And you'll want to nest the darts just like before. So this time we are going to start at the top edge, sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to start increasing our seam allowance to about 3/8 of an inch. So there'll be a little bit wider of a seam allowance around the inside of the bag, and then as we reach the top edge again, we're going to decrease back down to a 1/4 inch. So that way the top seam is the same size as the exterior, but then our lining fabric is actually a little bit smaller, so it'll fit nice and snug inside the bag. And this technique works well with other patterns, so you just have to reference your pattern and see if you can apply that technique too to help reduce some of that extra fabric on the lining. So now I'm increasing my seam allowance and I'm at 3/8 of an inch. So now that I'm about 2 inches away from the start, I'm just going to slightly angle my fabric and go back to the 1/4 inch. And then take your scissors and trim the seam allowance so it's about a 1/4 inch wide all the way around. So anytime that you can trim away some of the bulk, that just helps your finished bag keep its shape and it makes it easier to sew. So now you can turn your lining right side out. And take your exterior of your bag and push the flap so it's towards the inside. And put your lining inside the exterior so the fabrics are right sides together. And start by matching up those side seams. And then you can align the top edges and continue clipping all the way around. So next we're going to sew around the top edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here comes the exciting part. Now we can turn the bag right side out. So you're going to reach into the zipper pocket opening and you're going to pull your bag through and just use your thumbs to work it through that opening. And then reach in and smooth out the corners. And with the faux leather and cork fabric, you can kind of roll the seams to help it lay flatter and just relax the fabric. And before we put the lining down into the exterior, we're going to sew up that turning hole. So line up the folded edges and add a couple pins. And to close up that turning opening, you're just going to stitch across with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So you can push that lining of the pocket down into the bag. And you can zip up your pocket and then push the lining down into the bag as well. And just arrange it in place. And along the top edge of the bag, you'll want to roll the seam so that way it's right along the top edge. Sometimes I even like to roll the lining just slightly in a little bit more to kind of conceal that lining from the exterior of the bag, and add some clips all the way around. So make sure the lining is out of the way and the flap is out of the way, and we're going to sew around the top edge with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So I like to start at the back because the back stitching will end up being hidden by the flap. So now the bag itself is complete, and the last step in the pattern is to make the crossbody strap. So I've included instructions in the pattern if you're using cotton or a non-woven fabric like cork or faux leather. So I'm going to show you how to do the non-woven version, and there are just a couple extra steps to finish off the raw edges if you're using cotton or canvas. So be sure to refer to the pattern if you're using those. So for this type of material, we're going to start by piecing the fabrics together. So you have 2 lengths of fabric for your crossbody strap, and you're going to place the fabrics right sides together with about 1/4 inch of fabric extending beyond each side. So the pieces will be positioned perpendicular to each other, and you'll sew from corner to corner a diagonal seam. So make sure to back stitch. And I just eyeballed it, but you could certainly take your ruler and mark with your chalk and follow along that line. So now we're going to trim. So the seam allowance is about 1/4 inch from the stitch line to where I'm cutting. And then just finger press the seam open and top stitch an 1/8 inch from each side of the seam. So now take your scissors and trim that extra fabric even with each of the side edges. So now you're going to fold the strap in half along the length with wrong sides together. And you can add some sewing clips to hold the layers together, but I'm just going to fold it and stitch as I go. So you're using an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and you're going to sew along each long side of the strap. So after stitching, we'll attach the hardware, and I just want to say that I love using this type of material for straps because it's lightweight, durable, and it makes creating straps super easy, plus it's easy to clean. So I definitely recommend trying either the faux leather or the cork fabric for your straps. So we're going to take our slider buckle and thread it through from the underside over the center bar of the buckle and back down. And then you're going to fold the strap back onto itself. So it's about 1 inch or 2 inches, depending on your personal preference. So there are a couple ways to secure this. You can sew 2 lines across the strap, back stitching, or you could sew a box with an X in the middle for reinforcement. So I'm just going to sew the 2 lines across, one 1/8 inch from the raw end and a second line 1/4 inch from the raw end. I'm going to trim some of these threads before we move on. So now the side with the raw end is the underside. So take your thumb against the wrong side and bring it all the way to the loose end. So the underside is face up, and you'll want to slide the swivel hook so the hook is towards the top side, and slide the swivel hook close to the slider buckle. And you'll want to guide your hand along the underside to make sure your strap isn't twisted. And then thread the end back through the buckle, going from under, back over the bar, and down the other side. And just double check that your strap isn't twisted. So now that raw end is kind of hidden between the layers. So now at the free end of your strap, you're going to take your remaining swivel hook and have the hook towards the top side and fold the strap back onto itself again against the underside, and do your stitching just like before. So now you can attach your finished strap to your bag. So just clip each of the swivel hooks onto the D-rings. And you're ready to use your new bag. So I hope you enjoyed this pattern and how quickly that it came together. It's really fun to mix and match different fabrics with the contrasting fabric. This continues to be one of my favorite patterns, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you'll give it a try. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video in this series. If you decide to make this project, we would love to see, so use the hashtag MSQC Show and Tell. Have a great time sewing this project, and I will see you in the next tutorial.
Hi everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you aren't already part of the Missouri Star Quilt Company family, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out.